Richard, how do you feel about meeting Michael Bray?
I'm very curious. He's obviously a man of strong convictions, and I'm interested to know what makes a man like that feel so strongly that he knows what's right or wrong. I'm not overjoyed at meeting a man of his record, but curiosity overcomes that, and so I'm in a way looking forward to it. Mr. Bray?
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Richard Dawkins.
Good to meet you, sir. Michael Bray.
Nice of you to agree to this talk.
Yes, yes. Has anyone welcomed you to the park yet?
Not yet, no.
Good.
Anyway, I wanted to ask you, I can tell you're a man of firm convictions who
Yes.
knows what's right and wrong. I'm curious about where you get your conviction about what's right and wrong. Where does it kind of spring from?
I think I have an innate conviction or a sense of a consciousness of right and wrong. But as to explicit information, I think I get it from the scriptures, from Revelation.
Yeah. I mean, I have an innate conviction of what's right and wrong as well, but I don't get it from scriptures.
Right.
I'm wondering which particular parts, I mean, Old Testament, New Testament?
Well, they come from both.
Right.
I think we have revelation that's progressive, given over several hundred years, and but we can. It's finally clarified. The revelation, as it continues, is clarified and given all of its fullness in the revelation that is completed in Christ, in the Messiah who came. When Jesus came and broke into history, I think he and his apostles gave us further revelation that clarifies what is right.
There's a bit of a
wrong.
difference between New Testament and Old Testament morality, though, isn't there?
I don't think in terms of morality.
No?
No.
I mean, what about, say, stoning adulteresses to death, for example? I mean,
Well, I think execution for adultery is not rejected.
not rejected by whom? By you?
No, by the New Testament
What
writers.
about you? Do you favor execution of adultery?
I think that's fair to say that yeah, we ought to continue with that's still a proper punishment that the state ought to
I see.
prosecute, due process, and they could indeed
So,
execute.
so if somebody sleeps with another man's wife, he should be executed.
Yeah, in due process, yes.
Yeah.
I think what happens is the penalty serves as or the threat of a penalty serves as a deterrent, really, and so that the process actually very rarely is carried out because it's required that one has witnesses, and of course, as you can imagine, people who are out committing adultery usually don't have witnesses.
No, but if you did have witnesses, you feel they should be executed.
Yes.
Okay. What about breaking the Sabbath? I mean, the Old Testament is very clear about that,
Yeah.
that the penalty for breaking the Sabbath is
Right.
death.
Yeah, I think easily arguable is the fact that was a covenant sign specifically for Israel.
I think that's very true. I think it
Yes,
probably was. But
yeah, but doesn't
how do
carry
you
on.
decide then which bits of the Bible do carry on and which bits don't? I mean, is that your decision, or how do you make up your mind about that?
No, I think clearly many of the teachings that are given in Moses are what we call ceremonial instructions that have to do with teaching about preparation for the atoning sacrifice that finally comes with Christ, and laws having to do with purification, having to do with setting aside Israel, with various food laws, with various clothing laws, and so forth, have to do with teaching, as New Testament writers clarify. It has to do with teaching purity, teaching separation, teaching ultimately that the sacrifice that's going to be given for mankind has to be pure and perfect.
Yeah, but you have an absolutist view of Scripture, because, I mean, you accept that adultery should be punished by death, and what about homosexuality? Do you feel that too? I mean, is that part of your...
Yes,
Yes.
yes, and it's not something that's capriciously advocated. It's something that the same morality of the Old Testament in terms of general moral law, not specific law that's peculiar to Israel, but moral law for the nations, would include that.
So it's your decision then, which bits of the Old Testament you accept and which bits you don't?
Well, it isn't so much mine. It is one that has been upheld by Christian theologians down through the ages fairly consistently until maybe recent times. When we see Christianity coming into the Roman Empire, and emperors are converted with the guidance of various theologians that are surrounding them. Constantine begins to preserve marriage by providing for execution for adultery. Justinian, by the time, well, a few centuries later, Justinian, in the Justinian Code, execution for homosexuals is instituted. Yeah. And so you have indeed a powerful influence by Christian revelation, by churches, that does indeed enforce this.
You've said various times due process, and so that means that presumably within the confines of the law.
Yes.
Does that mean that you, I mean, what about your own activities? Have you stayed within the confines of the law? In, for example, your opposition to abortion?
Yes. Again, I clarify the fact that I don't speak particularly and haven't spoken about my particular deeds, but I do defend the action that I was convicted of, namely using force to stop abortion. I think it's lawful under our laws.
Whose laws is that?
The laws of the state.
Under the United States law?
Yes. The laws of our states, in common law, which our states recognize, and in various, even in codes, provide for the protection, defensive action to protect innocent people who are threatened with death. The only issue is whether or not we have a person in the case of the unborn. And before a jury, that should easily have been decided that these are.
Well, suppose we leave that on one side, whether it's a person for the moment. Your friend Paul Hill, who was convicted of murdering a doctor, he took the law into his own hands, didn't he?
No. Paul Hill, by his own testimony, acted defensively, not in retribution. That's the job of the law. The job of the law is to punish.
Yeah.
The job of citizens is indeed, out of love, to protect one another.
But if everybody did what he did, if everybody said, I have sufficient conviction in the absolute rightness of what I'm doing because of my scriptural upbringing and so on, somebody else's view might be different. I mean,
yes.
What if everybody took the law into their own hands? Wouldn't we descend into a terrible anarchy?
Well, this is the problem when we don't have law that's really authentic law, when we have laws that are made up by people on the spot, capriciously, as we have in the case of the so-called law of abortion rights, that was imposed upon the people by judges who seem to think of themselves avatars, who could to bring new law and impose it upon all the people.
But isn't that how law works? I mean, doesn't law work by judges' decisions, by court decisions, a sort of incremental process of...
Well, maybe that is how our law in the United States has developed maybe in the last several decades, but traditionally or I guess down through the ages it comes by different means. Usually a king with has the law he thinks is the law of God in his hands, or regardless whether you're talking about Christian cultures or otherwise, they usually have some divine origin or law that they believe in. And we in our culture have, in states in particular, the colonial states grounded their law in God's revelation.
Did they? I thought,
yes.
In my understanding of the United States Constitution is that it's a secular constitution with a rather rigid separation between church and state.
Well, I'm speaking of the moving back a few hundred years with the colonialists, the colonies,
yeah.
When they established their states,
yes.
their colonies, they were certainly Christian states. And the federal government was prohibited from establishing for the Union a religion.
So are you opposed to the Union? Are you opposed to the American Revolution and the founding of the United States?
Well, the American Revolution did not obviate, it did not annul the constitutions of the states. The states had their own rights and had their own, in fact, versions of Christianity established. Okay, so Anglicanism was established in Virginia, et cetera.
Yeah. And do you revere Jefferson, Washington, men like that, men of the Enlightenment who set up the United States?
Yes, I have a lot of respect for them. I think that they were very wise in their recognition, I think, of the problems in Europe when too much power was concentrated in one body.
Yeah.
And I think the fears they had would be justified if they were to look at what we have today, where the powers of government are concentrated, it seems, in the hands of 9 justices,
Yeah.
who wield authority and change laws and abolish laws with the stroke of a pen.
Okay.
This is a type of tyranny I think they would be appalled at.
Yeah. Okay. What about abortion then? Paul Hill killed a doctor and his bodyguard. Does it ever occur to you that that doctor had a wife to grieve for him and perhaps children? And
Yes.
well, I don't know him as a man, but I mean, no doubt he had a network of friends and acquaintances and relations.
Yes.
Paul Hill killed him.
Yes.
Now, the embryos that Paul Hill was defending, they were tiny little things without any knowledge, without any memory, without any affections, without any fears, without all the things that a full-grown adult doctor had. Doesn't that give your conscience a little bit of a twinge?
Well, I don't think we measure the value of someone by their cognizance of their surroundings or even their relationships. The value that we give human beings historically and thankfully from the scriptures is that they are created in God's image, and they have a certain sanctity because of that. So whether they be imbeciles or intellects, their value does not fluctuate accordingly.
And at what point does that come about at conception or 14 days after conception, or at what point do you think that infinite value suddenly enters the embryo?
Well, certainly the humanity is present as soon as we have, as you would know better than I, as soon as we have fertilization, we have a unique being.
Well, do we have a unique being? What about identical twins? I mean, identical twins are formed after fertilization by the splitting of the embryo.
Yes.
So we have 2 unique beings.
2 unique
then.
beings,
Yeah,
yes.
okay. What are
Thank
you
you.
going to do about that?
Thank you. Well, I guess we have double affection, perhaps.
Yeah.
I have twins, but they're not identical.
Okay.
And I have affections for both of them, some more than the other, depending on their behavior. But
How many children have you got?
11.
Wow. Gosh.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're doing our duty.
In what sense is that duty?
Actually, doing ourselves a favor.
Yeah.
And I hope the world, because my contention is that when God said, "Be fruitful and multiply," it was a good command, and that children are a blessing, and I believe they are.
You love your children?
Yes. Yes.
Right. Okay. Good. Back to the scriptures, which obviously is the foundation of much of your morality. When do you think the scriptures were written, and by whom?
Well, they were written over a good period of time. I think they go back somewhere at least to the time of Moses, and I think the Torah was written by Moses.
Really?
Editors were involved. Yeah, I think we had editors involved, but I think we have a body of prophets who are gathering the scriptures and keeping them, and there's editing going on.
It does refer to Moses' death, doesn't it? I mean, it
yeah,
also...
Yeah, we have editors that put all of the scriptures together.
Why would Moses refer to himself in the third person?
No, we have editors who are prophets. In Israel, there's a tradition of prophets, the Nabim, who are there to who receive revelation, who write down the words of prophets among the people. Those who are recognized as prophets usually verifiable by their miracles they would perform before the people, were known to be people who could be relied upon as ones who brought a message from God. So Moses would have been...
What about the beginning of Genesis, the story of the creation of the universe? Do you think that's literally true?
Yeah, I think that I do think indeed that the record is true. I think the language of Moses, or excuse me, Moses in Genesis is a unique kind of language. It's not necessarily explicitly historical. I think there's some literary devices used. So all I know is I think the message is clear that God is creating.
What about the timing, though? I mean, when do you think the creation happened?
I really don't know, because I think the language allows for for some
Well,
for
I
a lot of
mean,
flexibility.
as a scientist, I can tell you that the world began 4.5 billion years ago. So how would Moses have got information about how that happened 4.5 billion years earlier?
Well, I don't know that how necessarily old it was, as I was not there, or I don't affirm.
Well, nor was I, but I mean, there's
Right.
massive evidence from physical science.
Well, I think that's disputed by scientists. How exactly?
It is not disputed by any reputable scientist, but carry on.
Yeah, I believe there's a astrophysicist. What's his name? Nah.
I'm unlikely to have heard of him.
Yeah, I can't remember. I bet you have, but I can't think of him right now. Anyway, but let's, for the sake of continuing the discussion, because that really doesn't the time isn't really a problem to me. I think what it makes clear is that God is the one who is the originator.
Yeah, no, but it is a problem if Moses is supposed to have known about it. I mean, here's Moses, a man who was born at a certain time, I don't know when it was, 2000 BC or something. And how is he supposed to know about what happened when the universe began?
Well, Moses gets this, allegedly, by revelation.
So it just came inside his head. It sort of, it suddenly popped into his mind. Okay.
Perhaps, certainly.
Okay.
Sure.
Right.
If there's a God powerful enough to make the universe, he's powerful enough to give a message to a man.
Okay. Right. Do you ever get such messages? Do you ever get such revelations?
Haven't had one of those.
No, okay. When you derive your morality from the scriptures, and it's a morality of such strong conviction that you're actually prepared to go out and well,
save lives.
Well, actually kill. Now, I mean, I reckon I have a fairly strong moral conviction as well, but I'm not that confident. I wouldn't actually go and kill somebody for the sake of my morality. How can you be that confident?
I think my own confidence, I guess, has come with time. The more I think the scriptures, the more I live, the more satisfied I am intellectually that they interpret reality for me. They describe man as I see man, humanity. They describe, they tell me not only about humanity and how it acts, how its moral condition, its rebellion, its selfishness, all of what it describes just ring true to me. So that as I perceive reality and look for an explanation for it, I find the best explanation in that record.
Yeah, I mean, a Muslim looking at the Quran would no doubt say exactly the same thing about his holy book. And to some extent, of course, they agree with each other, but to other extents they don't. I mean, he's equally convinced that he's right, and you're equally convinced that you're right. How do you feel about that?
Well, I can't speak about his own personal mind and why he thinks what he thinks.
But I mean, suppose his scriptures led him to the absolute conviction that he ought to kill you.
Well, then I would say he's probably deceived.
Well, but he would say the same of you. And,
yes. And he would have to take what action he thought right and address the consequences, or be addressed with the consequences.
I mean, there's another way, which is not to take any holy book as being the way you live, but to actually look for evidence, for example, or in the case of morality, to say something like this. Who suffers in a particular situation? On the one hand, we have the doctor, whom Paul Hill killed. He suffered, his wife, if he had one, suffered, his parents suffered, his children suffered. On the other hand, we have the unborn embryos. Now, when I asked you this, you said that it wasn't a question of suffering or cognizance, it was a question of, as it were, the divine spark of humanity, something like that. But many of us who don't subscribe to any particular holy book worry about suffering. We actually worry about whether the victim of a murder, whether it's a murder of in your terms, of an embryo or of an adult doctor. I mean, can you not see that there's a big imbalance there between those two deaths?
Well, I couldn't take into account, because I'm not omniscient, to know all the sufferings that various people suffer, or people related, relatives, as you suggest.
But you're a human being. I mean, you know how you would suffer.
And I would know that Paul's wife and his children have suffered by Paul's own actions.
Yes, they have.
And his friends suffer. I suffer knowing that he is dead.
Yeah. Where do you think he is?
But I have high hopes that he's doing well.
You think he's in heaven?
Yes.
You think Jesus approves of murdering doctors?
I think that he said that we're to love the children just as we love others. They're not to be loved any less than others. Suffer the little children to come to me. And so they're not to be, however small they are, they're not to be relegated to some underclass, some subclass, and be treated just because they don't have the same intellects or the same cognizance as we do.
What about the fact that a very large number of conceived embryos just are aborted spontaneously anyway? I mean, does that affect your statement at all?
Well, obviously, in terms of passion, I can't muster up much passion for somebody I don't know. A child in the womb in the smallest form is someone I have no relationship with. So in terms of personal pain, I can't testify to any, but I don't know what pain that causes others.
No, I mean, many of them are aborted before the woman even knows she's pregnant.
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
this is it's actually a natural process of quality control.
Well, yes, and everyone dies.
Yeah.
And again, the suffering depends on one's personal relationship with others, you know, and so I'm not aware of what suffering that God or any of his spectators up in heaven might suffer. I don't know who can comprehend what happens in other parts of the universe.
Well, you pretty well know that when a tiny embryo of just a few cells is aborted, whether spontaneously or deliberately, I mean, you know nobody suffers from that.
Well,
and you know damn well that the doctor's wife, and indeed the doctor himself while he was being shot, suffered. I mean, surely you must know that there is a massive imbalance between those two.
The measure of doing right, doing wrong, is not always measured by, or the judgment of, an assessment of it is not always measured by suffering. When we, it's an aspect of truth and justice, something that you really can't discover apart from revelation, completely. I think we can get a general understanding. We see it in humanity, kind of a common understanding of what justice is. In various cultures, they seem to come up with the same general standard.
Well, most people would say that justice comes from courts of law and congresses passing laws and things, but you've said that it comes from revelation, which means a personal conviction within your head. Now, what if my revelation is different from yours, and his revelation is different from ours?
Well, I don't say that.
How do we choose between them?
I say there's general understanding. I think people have a general concept of what is right and what's wrong, as reflected in societies. But the specific revelation which confirms, I think, what people generally know, again, as reflected in societies, the specific revelation, I think, has come not to me, but to the writers, to prophets who have written down scriptures, who've written down revelation.
Yeah. I mean, every tribe in the world, anthropologists will tell you, has its own origin myths and its own customs, its own tribal customs.
And usually some display of belief in God.
Yes, or God of some kind.
Right.
But they're all different. And if you look historically at where the Christian, Jewish Bible comes from, it is the origin myth of a particular desert tribe, the Jews. I mean, isn't it just a historical accident that origin myth happens to have spread through Christendom, and that's the one that you happen to have been brought up with? But if you were to go to India or Africa or China, you'd find, at Borneo, you'd find completely different origin myths of equal poetic value.
Well, I don't know whether even the other, well, sometimes equal perhaps. I haven't read many other myths. I know there are various creation myths, as you put it, and flood myths, in fact, which are kind of interesting, that are around the world. But there are different efforts. In fact, the fact that there are so many, it shows the interest that humanity has in this deity that I think whose creation is evident here. That to me is more evidence of the fact that he's there. But it also, but the fact that there are efforts to appease him by most cultures trying to offer sacrifices or building up altars. All of these, to me, are evidences of some effort to connect with that spirit that made them all and holds them accountable.
Well, yes. I mean, there is a certain uniformity between them, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But you have laid great stress on revelation coming to particular prophets in the Old Testament as justifying really rather drastic actions, actually killing people,
Mm-hmm.
because you feel that this revelation is so necessarily true. Now, those parts of the Christian Jewish tradition are not the same in all different cultures. They're the particular ones which have come down to you because you happen to have been brought up in a Christian culture. So it's not really relevant that all these different cultures have a belief in some sort of God or gods. What is relevant is your absolute conviction that revelation, which is private inside somebody's head, not necessarily yours, is so strong and so important and so believable that you actually can justify murder for it.
I wouldn't say revelation is in my head, uniquely in my head. When I say revelation, when I use the term revelation, I'm referring to a message that has been given to prophets.
Yes.
Objectively.
No, that's right. To prophets in the Jewish tradition.
Right. Jewish
but
Christian.
What about other parts of the world which have a different tradition, whose revelations are no doubt very different?
Well, they actually aren't all that different. I mean, the codes of Hammurabi's code is very similar to
well, that's
the
not
Hebrew
surprising because they had similar roots.
Yeah, but what other examples do we have of codes that are all that different?
Well, one thing we have is modern Christian interpretations of their own codes, which are extremely different from yours. If you were to talk to any bishop or archbishop,
and that's easily traceable to post-Enlightenment times of where the scriptures were pretty much put, other than on revelation, other than the status of being a revealed word of God. So that is.
So you regret the Enlightenment? I mean, you'd rather live in a pre-Enlightenment time, would you?
Well, no, much good came from the Enlightenment, but what I'm sorry to see is the rejection of God's revelation in favor of embracing the human mind as the source of truth.
Right. So you would like to see the law of the land change so that homosexuals and adulterers were executed, but until that happens, you're prepared to take the law into your own hands?
No. I believe that there's still the state, even a state that isn't acknowledging God's word, is still put there by him. And it's the job of the state to carry out justice. And the state should be told and advocate. The justice should be advocated by citizens, but the state has the job of enforcing
law. So the way citizens advocate justice is by electing parliaments or congresses or presidents.
Well, yeah, particularly in our form, yes, we have the opportunity to do that.
Yes, well, so does any democracy.
Democracy, yes.
And, I mean, are you in favor of democracy?
I think democracy is that there's a lot of justice in that. In democracy, people get the government they deserve. If they vote poorly, they get a poor government. If they vote well, so there's some good. I like our system though, more, because it is not simply a pure democracy. I think it is a constitutional republic. It assumes that there are some truths which can't be easily overturned by a majority.
Yeah.
And it takes some time if that's going to happen.
Yes.
So that's.
But I mean, you and your friends are taking action outside the constitutional justice system.
Could we hold that until I get a drink? I'm sorry, I'm dry.
Sure.
I have a drink of water.
Hold it for a second. That was excellent.
That could be a long or a short one. I mean, I don't know how to.
I think we got to keep it short. Anyway.
Yeah. Keep it about another 5 minutes or so.
But I want to ask another question as well.
Okay.
Okay. Whenever you're ready, Richard.
So, Michael, tell me a bit about your personal journey to faith.
I was raised in Christianity, Lutheran tradition in particular, and then I began to raise questions when I was in high school and looked into different other explanations for reality, to interpret reality, and came back to the faith in my 20s, was curious about other people and their belief systems, other ones, particularly those who walked around with the Bible, like the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses and these folks, and so I wanted to study the scriptures all the more to be able to give an answer to those people who seem to be teaching something so different from what I was. And so my interest was then driven toward studying the scriptures more explicitly and looking somewhat into philosophy but mostly just interpreting the scripture, learning Greek and Hebrew and proceeded from there.
Okay. Did you go to theological college? What was your, yeah?
Yeah, I went to Colorado, what's now called Colorado Christian University, and then went to Denver Seminary, right in Denver. It was I graduated in 1980, Master's in New Testament. Then came to Maryland to teach, to function as assistant to the pastor of the Lutheran church I'd grown up in. And there it was that I began to continue in my studies, but also was approached with the whole matter of abortion. People brought the whole issue to my desk there in my office and then began to give me literature, and so I looked into that and and that was, of course, stimulating to look into the whole matter of, well, what is humanity? Well, when does human life begin? And when does it have a soul? Do humans have souls? When are they? And this whole issue of the sanctity of human life was something I looked into.
And you've been a practicing clergyman. I mean, you've had a church, or do you have a church now?
Yes, no, I don't now. We moved from the first church I was in. We left that church, and it was over, interestingly enough, the authority of Scripture, which you mentioned earlier concerning many of the major denominations who have in the last 100 years gradually abandoned the Scriptures as a final, as a true revelation. Such was the case in the church that I was serving in, and so when that was exposed before the congregation, at my hand, then many families left, and we started another church.
And what's happened to that other church now?
Well, that church continued until 2003, and then we disbanded. And our function, most of our work was, we started a crisis pregnancy center, we had a school, and we were always at the front of the issues that you've raised here. How can we defend the use of force? How can we justify that? And how can we speak about and what should be the standard for society?
Yeah.
And this
what did your congregation feel about your actions?
I was pastoring them before I went to prison. They remained at church while I was there, and I remained as their pastor, one of their pastors. We always had two pastors. And so they had no problem with my conviction.
Okay. One other question, if I may. In the news recently, obviously, we're all terribly concerned about the hurricane in New Orleans. What's your view about why God could allow such a catastrophe to happen, or the tsunami in Southeast Asia?
Well, I think when we see destruction in the earth, I'm reminded of the scriptures which say that that's evidence of the fact that God has got a problem with us. In creation, or as we look at nature, we see two things. We see that God is merciful and loving, and He provides for His creatures. We see that in looking at the wonder of nature, the wonder of creation. But at the same time, we see that He's angry, and the scriptures explain that there is sin in the world,
like Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah,
yes.
and God judges at times, and sometimes it's hard to understand very hard to understand because we say, well, why these particular people? Why not that particular city?
I mean, so do you think that the Hurricane Katrina was actually a punishment?
Well, I think it's any time a catastrophe occurs like that, we should raise those questions, because we all sit under judgment, and it's by God's grace that we continue to live.
Do you mean you think maybe somebody was sinning in New Orleans?
Well, the fact is, everybody's sinning somewhere.
Yeah, but so why pick on that city?
That particular city, I don't know. I mean, I know they've been accused of or charged with hosting a lot of perverse activities.
Like what?
Southern decadence, for example. Someone has said, perhaps making the point, you have heard it said that people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, but I say unto you, people who live below sea level shouldn't celebrate decadence, indicating that maybe maybe
I
God
don't-
was displeased.
I mean, I'm just naive. I don't live in this country. What particular kinds of decadence is New Orleans famous for?
Well, I guess the Mardi Gras is a time when people kind of cut loose and engage in all kinds of sexual immorality. I guess the Southern decadence, where the homosexuals come and and the mayor welcomes them in as homosexuals to have their party and displays. I think when you publicly proclaim and approve of something, especially your city leaders, publicly proclaim and welcome what is decadence and what is true, what is abhorrent in God's eyes, then you really invite him to come and respond. And so it may be that this was God's response to that. In any case, we're stuck with still the problem all of us have is that we're in a sin-ridden world, and sometimes judgment falls here and there, but the warning to us is not to think ourselves immune from his judgments, not only as societies but as individuals. He will judge each of us one day.
What about the Southeast Asian tsunami? Was there a lot of sin round about there as well?
Well, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's common to all. Sin is common to all, and so it is, again, the fact that we aren't destroyed. Anybody, isn't it? The fact that we live, that I breathe from day to day is by his mercy and his grace. I am worthy of judgment. Everyone is. And when we see these kind of judgments, these should be reminders to us that our day will come as well.
Well, Michael, I'm curious, how do you respond to meeting an atheist?
Well, I'm particularly honored to meet you, particularly as an atheist, because I feel like I have come upon an opportunity to meet what David Hume might have been like, or
I take that as a compliment.
Yes. Well, I thought you might, and or of course Mr. Voltaire, and
that's a good one too.
And I'd never had the opportunity to meet those men, and so maybe I could put you in their place, and you could do it in cameo, if you don't mind. My impression is that, not my impression, I think I get this idea from the scriptures that everyone really knows he's there, but people are dissatisfied with him or mad at him or angry at him. What would you say if I thought that might be your case?
Well, I've met that before, of course. It's not how I feel, actually. I actually genuinely think he's not there. I don't believe he exists. I agree with you that there is an enormously powerful illusion that he exists. I mean, just look around you at all the beauty and the trees and the flowers and the birds and things. And because I'm a biologist, I've got an alternative explanation for all that, which hangs together very well. And I won't go into the details, but the more I think about it, the more I progress on my journey, the more I become convinced that there is nothing out there, and that we are on our own, and that life is wonderful, even though it's temporary. And I find, obviously, religious people vary enormously. I mean, you're one end of the spectrum, the Archbishop of Canterbury is at the other end of the spectrum. And I'm kind of curious about both. I mean, you'd be having a far more aggressive argument if we had the Archbishop of Canterbury here than with me, I dare say. But to get back to your point, no, I'm not angry at God and furious with him or resenting him. I just don't think he's there. I am angry at people, I think, like you, who use their passionate and obviously sincere belief in God to, well, as I've put it before, to take the law into their own hands and cause suffering. I rather prefer the kind of religious person who does a bit of live and let live, and doesn't, as it were, force their absolutist beliefs on other people.
I'm wondering, in your distinction, your personal distinction from being one who would, I suppose, in more humility, call himself an agnostic, you would distinguish yourself from an agnostic. You would say,
that's an interesting question. That's a good point.
How do you go to that point?
Well, one way to put it is that there have been an awful lot of gods in history. I mean, there's Thor and Zeus and Wotan and Apollo and things, and you don't believe in them, I dare say. So, in other words, you're an atheist about Baal and about the golden calf and about Thor and about Apollo. I just go one god further.
So I might say that you believe in a God called no God.
That's playing with words. I believe in nothing supernatural. I believe that there's a natural explanation for everything, although we're very far from getting it yet. I mean, one has to be humble. I'm glad you mentioned the word humility, because one has to be humble as a scientist, that there's an awful lot we don't know yet.
But as a scientist, do you assume, I know you only operate in the physical world.
Right.
You only deal with what you can observe. Do you assume that matter is eternal?
Well, when you say deal with what we can observe, observing, there's observing and observing. I mean, there's observing with the naked eye, and there's observing in the scientific sense of setting up hypotheses, models of the universe, which you then go and test. So your question was about matter.
Do you assume it's eternal?
I would have to be more of a physicist to know exactly what the various models of the end of the universe are going to look like. I mean, there are some models of the end of the universe which say that the universe is going to go on forever expanding, others that have it contracting to a big crunch and so on. I'm not a physicist enough, and so I wouldn't like to, but why do you ask the question?
Well, I look at because I'm curious about the other end. Do you assume it is eternal in terms of origins?
Oh, well, the current physical orthodoxy, the orthodoxy of physicists today, is that the universe began, time began, and space began at a particular moment, a few billion years ago, I mean some 15 billion years ago, in the Big Bang. And so this particular universe that we observe began then. I think I'm right in saying that nobody knows whether there was a before, in the sense that this might be a little local universe which stemmed out of some grander universe.
But matter, then, you say, is not eternal. There is a beginning of matter?
Well, when the universe began, there was nothing that you could call matter anyway.
There was no matter?
No. I mean, it was something else which became matter within some time after the Big Bang.
And prior to matter's beginning, what existed, do you say?
Well, I think what you mean is prior to the Big Bang, what existed. And
no, even prior to the Big Bang. Whenever matter, what existed prior to matter's beginning?
Well, physicists call it a plasma, but I don't know what that is because I'm not a physicist. But before the Big Bang is a deeper question, and there are some physicists who will say that the word before doesn't even have a meaning before the Big Bang.
Okay. Could you say that? Would you think it would be fair to say that I assume that there is spirit, and that spirit is eternal?
Yeah,
that's my assumption.
Yes.
I'll tell you, it would be my assumption. Would you think it's?
No, I mean, I don't even know what spirit means, and so it doesn't. That doesn't strike me as a very helpful way to characterize what's going on in the universe.
It occurs to me that you, at some point, have to postulate a beginning of matter, and if you don't, then you've got eternal matter.
Yes, you do have to postulate something like a beginning, but the one thing I would say is that whatever you postulate is not going to help to postulate a God.
But if I postulate spirit preceding matter...
Yeah. Well, there are two ways of handling that. You could say that spirit is the name that I give to whatever preceded matter, in which case that's playing with words. Or you could say that spirit is something like the God of Christianity, in which case you said something much more contentious. But I think we've probably...
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And only one last question, and that is, why are people like you, Michael, so interested in other people's private lives?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
In adultery and homosexuality, it was something at the beginning I just wanted to... Would you mind answering that?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Why private lives are seen in that way. That'd be very useful.
Yeah.
In that, the last bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Michael, your stance on things like homosexuality and adultery suggests that you are, and this is true of many religious people, are very concerned with the morality of other people's private lives. After all, homosexuality presumably affects the two men or two women in question and doesn't actually harm anybody else. What's your feeling about that?
Well, if you put aside all consequences that might occur in terms of disease or breaking up of families, or that might occur from adultery, and if you put that aside, I would advance another concern I have, and namely that there is once again the God of the universe who enters into history and executes judgments on cities and nations, and I'm one of those within those bounds. I'm also a citizen, and so I do, and my family also, and others in a city would suffer from the deeds of someone else, because there is a God in heaven who does bring judgments, and the rain, as it says, falls on the just and the unjust. We have to suffer for the deeds of others.
Okay, so
it isn't just private.
I must quote you the famous rhyme, which you may not know about that quote about the rain it raineth every day upon the just and unjust fella.
Yes.
But more upon the just, because the unjust hath the just's umbrella.
Very good. It's a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Yes. Okay.
Well, that was curious. Michael Bray actually admitted that he thought that adulterers should be executed and homosexuals. And yet, I don't think I thought of him as an evil man. I was reminded of a quotation from the American physicist Steven Weinberg, very distinguished Nobel Prize-winning theoretical physicist. Weinberg said, "Religion is an insult to human dignity. Without it, you'd have good people doing good things and evil people doing evil things. But for good people to do evil things, it takes religion."